I think I have a shared experience with a lot of people my age over Star Wars. I grew up with both the original and the prequel trilogy, and I enjoyed those movies, but as the modern sequels rolled out, I began to lose interest. I liked The Force Awakens, but I was thrown off by The Last Jedi. I remember walking out of the theater thinking that, for the first time in my young life, I did not like a big blockbuster movie I had seen in a theater, but it wasn't until Rise of Skywalker that I completely gave up on the franchise. I thought that movie was such a train wreck that I actually saw it twice in theaters, because to me it instantly became so bad it's good. Unfortunately for Disney, I didn't stick around to hate watch for long. Since Rise of Skywalker came out, I haven't consumed any Star Wars media. I haven't checked out any of the TV shows on Disney Plus, or played any of the video games, and when the next trilogy of Star Wars films inevitably rolls around, I doubt I'll be watching. I have become the guy in that one Gus Johnson video.
Hey man, have you seen the new Star Wars movie?
No, I have not.
Somehow, the biggest movie franchise of all time has made zero impact on my life, with one small exception. Origami Yoda is a series of books aimed at middle schoolers that was released in the early 2010s. It is wildly different from most Star Wars media as it is not connected to the Star Wars universe. And I don't mean it's one of those extended universe stories. Origami Yoda takes place on Earth, where the Star Wars lore is fictional. Instead of a fantasy adventure narrative, the series tells the story of a group of ordinary middle school outcasts obsessed with Star Wars, with the main narrator being a kid named Tommy. The titular Origami Yoda is a literal Yoda finger puppet made out of paper by one of Tommy's friends, Dwight, who uses the puppet to give advice to his classmates. Each book is written as if it were a police case file, with Tommy and his friends either trying to answer a question or documenting a specific event at their school. There are 6 books in the series, and they gradually increase in scope. The original book's plot was about Tommy questioning if Origami Yoda was real or not, but by the end of the series, half the student body is protesting against the school board. I read a lot of these Diary of a Wimpy Kid type books when I was growing up. Big Nate, Timmy Failure, Captain Underpants, etc. But besides for Diary of a Wimpy Kid itself, Origami Yoda is the only one that I still think about to this day. And like I said in the intro, it's not because I'm a Star Wars fan. I honestly think that the Origami Yoda series is one of the best depictions of adolescence I've ever seen in fiction. So many stories feel like they could have been taken straight out of my own life. Characters will make niche references to films or video games, and expect their friends to understand them, only for no one to get the joke. Teachers will give big speeches to the student body, and interrupt themselves because one kid is doing something stupid. The central friend group probably spends more time arguing with each other than having pleasant conversation throughout the whole series. Even small details, like the yearbook club receiving a pretentious name, made me laugh because they paralleled my experience in school. The book also tackles much larger themes than what other books in this genre typically cover. Issues like social anxiety and the failures of the American school system are recurrent problems that the kids have to deal with. The parents are mostly absent from the stories, since they all revolve around the school, but whenever they are mentioned, it usually is not in a good light. Tommy's parents are neglectful, Dwight's dad is absent, and Mike's parents are Christian fundamentalists, who believe Star Wars is devil worship, which is kind of a crazy theme to cover in an officially licensed Star Wars book. However, the kids' family life is not sensationalized, and most of the time the kids do not even recognize anything is seriously wrong. Living in a dysfunctional family is all they know, and since the story is told from the kids' perspectives, these facts of life are glossed over. To find the real big idea of Origami Yoda, all you have to do is look at the cover of the book and think like a middle school bully, because let's be real here, Origami Yoda looks a little autistic. I have to be a little careful with how I word things in this video from now on, because I'm not an expert in autism, nor have I been diagnosed with autism, nor do I know anyone in my real life that is one of those two things. I'm not a reliable source in autism in an academic sense, so everything I say in this video is either my interpretation of a subjective text, or my personal observations on a complicated mental disorder. But what I will say is that I have made multiple hour-long videos on the careers of Minecraft YouTubers, so Anyway, while never explicitly stated in the books, the author of Origami Yoda, Tom Engelberger, has said in interviews that the character of Dwight has Asperger's, which in 2021 merged with autism, but it does not take a psychologist to pick up on this idea. As, to put it politely this time, the very specific idea to mix origami with Star Wars could be viewed as combining two interests that are stereotypical of autistic people to appeal to them. But nerdy interests are not the only stereotypical aspect of the books. While on the paper, the plot of Origami Yoda appears to be middle schoolers solving their problems through Star Wars analogies, the real story of Origami Yoda, at least among the first 3 books, is about learning how to communicate with a friend who has autism. The emphasis on origami in Star Wars is only used as a framing device for this idea to be explored. From the first chapter of the first book, it is clear that Dwight is socially inept. He constantly gets into trouble with teachers for ridiculous reasons, does not understand many social norms, and frequently does things most would consider to be embarrassing. One of the first stories Tommy tells about Dwight is how he accidentally bumped into a popular girl at a school dance and made her spill her drink. Instead of apologizing to her or even acting like he didn't notice, both of which are regular responses to this social situation, Dwight gets down on his stomach and wipes the spill up with his t-shirt. Then, when he stands back up soaking wet, he asks the girl if she wants to dance. The girl declines his offer and Dwight walks back to his friends, who tell him to quit embarrassing them and to play it cool. So, Dwight says, "You mean just stand here doing nothing like you guys do? Okay." And freezes in place. When Tommy leaves the dance, he looks back and sees Dwight still standing with a blank expression, at the spot he was told to be more normal. This is one of many instances in the series of Dwight's strange behavior. Most of the time it isn't malicious or immoral, it's only weird. Occasionally, Dwight admits he acts crazy because he's trying to make a joke. Like when he decides to only respond with the word purple when Tommy is questioning him. But 9 times out of 10, there is no reason given for his odd behavior. Why is he obsessed with fast food? Why does he repeatedly crack his knuckles? Why does he dig holes in his backyard, even though it freaks out his neighbors? Nobody really knows, least of all Dwight. However, while Dwight is far from perfect socially, he is able to go about his daily life without assistance. He doesn't seem to suffer from any debilitating habits, even from something as common as extreme sensitivity to sound. And he has a neurotypical girlfriend for most of the series. About once or twice in each book, Tommy will recall a conversation where it seems like Dwight drops all of his quirks and talks like a normal kid. Dwight may be autistic, but for lack of a better phrasing, it is not to the point where it controls every aspect of his life. I think this idea is an important part of the series for kids to recognize. A lot of autistic characters in media, even adult media, end up as exaggerated caricatures that negatively influence how the public views autism. For example, I like the movie Rain Man in the context of a story about a guy reconnecting with his severely mentally handicapped brother. But to say Rain Man is an accurate representation of all neurodivergent people would be absurd. But with Dwight, the series teaches kids that neurodivergence is not something to be feared or pitied. Neurodivergence is what humans have collectively agreed upon to be uncommon behavior without any regard to morality or intelligence. Sometimes an autistic person's behavior may be annoying, but other times it might be kinda funny. Like how anyone's behavior can be perceived positively or negatively. Strange behavior does not equal malice or stupidity, and by the end of the second book, it becomes clear that Dwight is a bright kid with good intentions, even if his behavior is pretty strange. However, Tom Engelberger takes these themes a step further than where I feel like most authors would, as in the third book, Dwight winds up at a new school named Tippett Academy. In Dwight's previous school, he was treated like an ordinary kid despite his eccentricities. Some students made fun of him, some students befriended him, but most ignored him. But at Tippett, from the minute he enters the building, he is treated like he is special. His teacher singles him out and has him explain his fascination with origami to the whole class, and then has all the other students make their own origami Yodas, so they can understand Dwight. All of this special treatment causes Dwight to, in the words of his friends, quit acting weird. He stops making origami, stops misbehaving in class, and stops talking to his old friends. Some of the kids flat out say that they think Tippett has cured Dwight of his weirdness. This plot was actually foreshadowed in book 2. as Dwight's girlfriend Carolyn transferred to Tippett at the start of that school year. Carolyn suffers from a hearing disability and has to wear hearing aids, and because of this, she is also singled out by her peers as special. It isn't until she lies that she had a surgery to cure her deafness that other students begin to treat her like a regular kid. I should also clarify that Dwight wasn't literally added into special needs classes at Tippett. A special needs class at the original school does make an appearance later in the series, but Dwight is not a part of this program and he attends the same classes as neurotypical kids. Despite not being special needs, his teachers and peers still give him special treatment. The introduction of Tippett adds a new layer to the theme of autism awareness in the series. It is true that kids should learn to understand their neurodivergent peers, but what that means is for the kids to treat them like they would any other kid 95% of the time. If Dwight's behavior isn't hurting anyone or himself, then it can probably be ignored. But if it is annoying people, then that should be called out. But Tippett treated everything Dwight did like it was the most amazing thing ever, and it comes off as condescending. They emphasize that Dwight is special and great so much that it's almost like they are calling him a slur. The school isn't actually helping Dwight learn how to communicate with neurotypical people or vice versa. They're only ensuring he never gets his feelings hurt, which is a terrible way for any kid to learn how to adjust to the real world. Tommy realizes near the end of the book that Dwight doesn't have any friends at his new school. He only has kids that try to act like they understand him, so they can seem morally righteous for being friends with an autistic kid. Despite these kids having good intentions on the surface, their actions end up being more damaging to Dwight's spirit compared to any of the teasing from students at his old school. Eventually, Dwight realizes that he doesn't actually like his new life, and reverts back to his weird ways. The plot in Book 3 reminds me a lot of how autism and neurodivergence is treated on the internet these days. I won't lie and say mental disorders like autism are understood by everyone online, but I think it is safe to say that people are more accommodating to neurodivergence than in previous times. Instead, I have found it a lot more common that fully functional individuals will misbehave online and then hide behind their autism or some other disorder to excuse themselves from their bad behavior. It's where the whole "I'm literally neurodivergent and a minor" meme comes from. There is definitely some nuance to this, as something like a manic episode from bipolar disorder can consume a person's life and alter it permanently. But at a certain point, every self-sufficient person becomes responsible for their behavior, and usually at a relatively young age. Being young and autistic is not an excuse to send people death threats. Sometimes in Origami Yoda, Dwight acts unreasonably, and whether or not it's because he is neurodivergent is irrelevant. If you are making the people around you uncomfortable with your behavior, you should understand that people are uncomfortable, and stop whatever you are doing. Having something like autism may be an explanation for committing antisocial behavior, but it doesn't mean it's okay for you to be antisocial. Ultimately, every autistic person needs to find the right balance between being themselves and not hindering the lives of the people around them. And the Origami Yoda series shows the journey that one autistic kid goes through to find this balance. Except, Dwight's not the only autistic character in Origami Yoda. In a random Twitter conversation years after the series ended, Engelberger revealed that the character of Harvey is also autistic. When I first read this, I was pretty surprised, because on the paper, Harvey's character is the polar opposite of Dwight, and he is basically the main villain in half of the books. Although he is technically friends with the group, no one seems to actually like him due to his abrasive personality. He constantly criticizes his peers and brags about how much smarter he is than everyone else. If someone says a Star Wars quote slightly wrong, he goes on a long tangent about how incorrect that person is. While Dwight avoids conversations even if he probably should be involved, Harvey always butts in with his 2 cents even when it is completely inappropriate. In the last book, Tommy starts trimming down his comments on the case file because they are needlessly long rants about astronaut ice cream or similarly arbitrary things. Additionally, Harvey seems to be unable to relate to any of his friends on a personal level, and as a result, his friends begin to loathe him as middle school goes on. It does not help that he tries to repeatedly sabotage Dwight and Origami Yoda. In the first book, Harvey tries to prove that Dwight is tricking people with Origami Yoda, but he fails since Dwight was actually helping his friends improve their lives. So in the second book, he convinces the principal that Dwight is a genuine threat to the school, which results in Dwight being put up for expulsion. He ends up going back on this at the end of the book and tries to save Dwight, but his friends are still pretty cautious of him at the start of book 3. It is not until the end of the third book when his friends begin to better understand Harvey. I already talked about the Tippett Academy storyline, but the other main plotline is that a girl named Sarah has made her own Origami Yoda ripoff named the Fortune Wookiee, and is now giving kids advice with it. Harvey, who is trying to prove that the Fortune Wookiee is a hoax, ends up asking it why everyone thinks he is a jerk, to which Sarah tells him that not everyone speaks Wookiee. While Harvey ignores this and goes on a tangent about how Sarah's answer proves that the Fortune Wookiee is not real, Tommy overhears the answer and realizes what Sarah meant. Just like how Chewbacca roars harshly, Harvey often speaks harshly, but he is not trying to be offensive. When Harvey criticizes someone or complains about something, he thinks he is being funny. He does not realize that others do not interpret his comments in the way he perceives them. Even when he does recognize that his actions are annoying, he always blames this on people misinterpreting what he is saying. Harvey is not self-aware enough to own up to his mistakes, and at the same time, his friend group was not yet mature enough to explain to Harvey the true problem they had with him. While Harvey may not have understood Sarah's advice in the moment, I think it did have an effect on his character long term. In the next 2 books, he is still a little abrasive, but he makes more of an attempt to empathize with his friends. He begins to enjoy gym class because, after finally listening to Dwight and Origami Yoda's advice, he realizes that its true purpose is to teach kids discipline. He also begins to show interest in Sarah, the first person to see him for who he really is, when in previous books he never showed any romantic feelings for anyone. This ends up causing its own conflict since Sarah is actually Tommy's girlfriend by that point in the series, and Harvey decides to annoy Tommy because of his jealousy of him. But that's irrelevant to what I'm trying to say. My point is that the character of Harvey further emphasizes the main theme that I've been harping on the entire time. To anyone familiar with autism, you understand that the disorder is a spectrum, and that 2 autistic people, like Dwight and Harvey, may show entirely different symptoms with minimal overlap. But to kids unfamiliar with the disorder, they may not understand this idea until they read Origami Yoda. Both Dwight and Harvey are neurodivergent, and the young readers will at least understand that they are weird. But the ways in which they diverge from neurotypical people are completely different. Harvey is super confrontational and annoying, while Dwight is shy yet unpredictable. How Dwight and Harvey learn to connect to their peers, and how their peers learn to understand them, differ significantly because they are 2 different people with different personalities, and they deal with different obstacles in their lives. They may be alike in that they both have autism and both love Star Wars, but those 2 commonalities do not define them as people. But I want to go back to Dwight and how he and his friends learn to respect and communicate with one another, because those interactions are the main content of the books. Since I have spent so much time discussing the personal issues the kids face in Origami Yoda, you may have forgotten that the surface level plot is that Dwight is carrying around a fucking paper Yoda puppet on his finger. I can relate to a lot of things in Origami Yoda, but I never experienced anything like that. Why did Tom Engelberger choose paper finger puppets to be the central concept of his book series about autism? I said at the start, half joking and half serious. It was because it looked autistic, but the idea goes deeper than that. A big point of the book that I've neglected to mention so far is that Tommy and the other kids genuinely believe Dwight's Origami Yoda uses the Force from Star Wars to give his advice. When I said Harvey tried to prove Origami Yoda was a trick, I mean that he argued Origami Yoda was not a real Jedi that could use the Force. Despite this completely throwing off the realism of the series, by the 4th book, it becomes accepted that Dwight and Origami Yoda are 2 disconnected entities. To be fair, sometimes what Origami Yoda predicts is literally impossible for Dwight to have known with 100% certainty, but I think those cases can be written off as minor plot holes. When revisiting the series years later, it's clear that most of the important stuff Origami Yoda says is Dwight's way of communicating his thoughts to his friends. The 1st book literally ends with Dwight breaking the illusion of Origami Yoda, and he explains to Tommy why he's given him a certain piece of advice. Dwight is actually a lot more socially aware than his friends realize, but for whatever reason, he is unable to communicate the thoughts in his head into words coming out of his mouth. Maybe he thinks his friends wouldn't listen to him, maybe he literally can't verbalize his opinions under his regular persona, but the cause of Dwight's social barriers doesn't really matter. All that matters to the story is that something inside him is preventing Dwight from forming deeper connections with his friends. So, Dwight invents a character he can act as, and this character can analyze and give his friends advice on their social dilemmas. It may sound delusional to a neurotypical person, but in Dwight's irregular mind, it is what allows him to get over his social anxiety. With Origami Yoda, he is able to share his thoughts with his friends, even if his friends misinterpret those ideas as coming from a supernatural creature. The literal Origami Yoda not only helps Dwight overcome his insecurities, but his friends as well. That last line is similar to how I described the book at the start, but now I can better explain what this entails. The kids in Origami Yoda, as you can probably assume, start out as losers. They are super anxious, have low self-esteem, and are disliked by most of their peers. But with each book, each kid begins to grow more confident in themselves directly because of Dwight's advice. Some even make their own Star Wars inspired finger puppet, because they realize it might be useful to think from a perspective outside of their own. Tommy goes from a Charlie Brown type loser to the respected leader of the group. Mike goes from the school's crybaby to becoming calm and composed. Provando goes from the selfish food hog to the most generous student at the school. Nearly every major character in the series undergoes some arc spared on by Dwight. And while that's kind of expected in a book series as long as this one, think about the other middle school age series I mentioned before. Greg Heffley, Big Nate, and Harold and George all appear in more books than the kids in Origami Yoda, but they go through significantly less character development because telling a meaningful story was not really the point of their novels. But Engelberger actually had a vision for a series, complete with topics he wanted to explore, and ideas on how to present them to his young audience. Plus, it's cool to show how a neurodivergent kid can positively impact his friends, as I imagine there are plenty of neurodivergent kids in the audience who are looking for good role models. This brings me to the ending of Origami Yoda, which might be the most important part of the whole series. In the last Origami Yoda book, the kids take a field trip to Washington, D.C. Origami is banned on the field trip, and although the kids complain a lot, this rule is more or less followed. During the trip, Dwight meets a kid from another school named Micah, who seems to relate to Dwight on a personal level. This is glossed over until the next day, when Dwight announces to his friends that he no longer has Origami Yoda. Most of them, especially Tommy, are very skeptical. Even after how far they all came with understanding Dwight and his eccentricities, it's hard to take a comment like this at face value. But then, for the first time in the whole series, Dwight asks to write a chapter in Tommy's case file. There, Dwight says that Origami Yoda told him that Dwight and his friends no longer needed him, and that Micah now required Origami Yoda's guidance. Dwight then says goodbye to Yoda for good and mails him to Micah. Upon reading Dwight's entry, Tommy understands why Dwight finally gave up Origami Yoda. It had served its purpose. Dwight and his friends matured, became more confident, and now had genuine affection for each other. Dwight no longer needed the vessel of Origami Yoda to share his ideas, and his friends no longer needed Dwight's guidance to make good decisions. So, the series ends. Origami Yoda is retired, and the kids, while still weird, are a lot happier than at the start of the first book. Who knew that the best way to learn confidence is by talking to a guy who was a Star Wars finger puppet at all times? When I was a kid, I wanted the series to continue after this book. Even if they abandoned all the main characters and followed Micah instead, I wanted there to be more wacky shenanigans with Origami Yoda. But looking back now, I don't think there was a more fulfilling conclusion in anything I consumed when I was young. Not only do all the main characters receive a logical end to their stories, but the last few pages of Origami Yoda teaches kids one final lesson. It is okay to grow up and leave some childish behavior behind. Dwight's Origami Yoda was a good stepping stone for him and his friends to communicate with each other through in middle school. But if he never gave it up, it would inevitably lead to a negative effect on his life. I imagine it's pretty difficult to explain in a business meeting why you are pretending to be Yoda when talking to your boss. It was time for Origami Yoda to go, and that was okay. I never wanted to explore space or become a Jedi after watching the Star Wars movies, but I did want to make my own Origami Yoda after reading the series. I know that not everyone, especially older generations, feel the same way that I do about Star Wars, and that's fine. But I believe there are a lot of people my age that didn't like the movies and enjoy the complementary media more. There is a whole online fan community supported by Engelberger that wrote their own Origami Yoda expanded universe, and they were active until 2021. There is much more that I can say about this book, but I think I am happy with leaving the video off here. I will forever be thankful that Tom Engelberger wrote Origami Yoda, and educated me on everything from Star Wars lore to neurodivergence. The books were a big part of my childhood, and hopefully, they are still being read by children today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Most fans of music would not consider blackbear to be a good artist. His music is a weird mix of pop, trap, emo rap, and EDM that is rather divisive over whether it is actually pleasant to listen to. But if the dark, lo-fi beats that